Have you ever wondered if the person you love might be hiding something darker beneath their perfect smile? I'm about to share with you a story that changed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and the warning signs we sometimes choose to ignore. This is about Sarah, a woman who discovered that sometimes the most dangerous threats come wrapped in the most beautiful packages. Sarah was 34 when she met Michael at a charity fundraiser in San Francisco. She was there representing her marketing firm, wearing a navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for the event, feeling slightly out of place among the city's elite donors. Michael approached her during the silent auction, making a joke about the overpriced art that made her laugh so hard she nearly spilled her champagne. He had this way of making her feel like she was the only person in the crowded ballroom. His green eyes focused entirely on her as she talked about her work with small businesses. That first conversation stretched for 2 hours, flowing from art to travel to their shared love of hiking in the Marin Headlands. Michael was 38, worked in tech consulting, and had this easy confidence that made Sarah feel both comfortable and slightly off balance. When he asked for her number, she gave it without hesitation, something she rarely did. Her friend Lisa, who'd dragged her to the fundraiser, later said she'd never seen Sarah light up like that before. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant in North Beach, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles stuck in wine bottles. Michael had remembered she'd mentioned loving authentic carbonara and found this tiny place that made it perfectly. He listened to her stories about growing up in Ohio, about her parents' divorce when she was 12, about how she'd moved to California with nothing but ambition and a suitcase. He shared his own struggles with his father's expectations, how he'd been pushed into business when he'd really wanted to be a teacher. The vulnerability in his voice when he talked about disappointing his family made Sarah want to reach across the table and hold his hand. By their third month together, Sarah was completely smitten. Michael had integrated into her life seamlessly, charming her friends at wine nights, remembering their birthdays, asking about their problems with genuine interest. He cooked elaborate Sunday dinners at her apartment, teaching her his grandmother's recipe for pot roast, dancing with her in the kitchen while they waited for it to cook. When Sarah's mother visited from Columbus, Michael took time off work to show her around the city, winning her over with his patience and humor. The first red flag was so small, Sarah almost missed it. They were at Target doing their weekly shopping when the cashier complimented Sarah's earrings. Just simple gold hoops, nothing special, but the young woman said they really suited her face shape. Michael's hand tightened on Sarah's waist, his smile never wavering as he thanked the cashier and steered Sarah away. In the car, he was quiet, and when Sarah asked if everything was okay, he said the cashier had been flirting with her, that it was disrespectful. Sarah laughed it off, said the girl was just being friendly, but Michael's jaw stayed tense the whole drive home. After that, Sarah started noticing things. How Michael would check her phone when notifications came in, just quick glances that he'd play off as curiosity. How he'd suggest she change clothes if he thought something was too revealing, always framing it as concern for her safety. How he'd text constantly when she was out with friends, needing to know where she was, who she was with, when she'd be home. Each incident was small enough to explain away. He was protective because he cared. He was attentive because he loved her. He just wanted to keep her safe in a dangerous city. The night everything changed started like any other Friday. Sarah had worked late on a presentation, texting Michael updates about when she'd be home. He'd offered to pick her up, but she'd said she'd take an Uber, wanting to decompress after the stressful week. When she got home at 9:30, the apartment was dark. She called out for Michael, heard movement from the bedroom. When she flipped on the light, she found him going through her laptop, her personal emails open on the screen. The confrontation was ugly. Michael accused her of hiding things, of having secrets, of probably cheating with her colleague Daniel, who'd been mentioned in a few work emails. Sarah tried to explain that Daniel was gay, happily married, that they were just working on the Morrison Industries account together. but Michael wasn't listening. He grabbed the laptop, holding it above his head, demanding she tell him the truth. When Sarah reached for it, afraid he'd break her work computer, Michael shoved her. "Not hard," he'd say later, just enough to get her away from him. But Sarah stumbled, hit her hip on the dresser corner, pain shooting through her side. The next morning, Michael was devastated. He brought her breakfast in bed, ice for her bruised hip, flowers he'd apparently run out to buy at dawn. He cried, actually cried, talking about how his ex had cheated on him, how it had destroyed his ability to trust. He promised to go to therapy, to work on his jealousy. He was so broken, so genuinely remorseful, that Sarah found herself comforting him, telling him they'd work through it together. The bruise faded, but the dynamic had shifted. Over the next few months, the incidents escalated so gradually that Sarah didn't realize she was adjusting to each new level of control. Michael started showing up at her office unexpectedly, bringing lunch, but really checking who she was with. He befriended her co-workers, especially the men, in what Sarah initially thought was sweet, but gradually realized was surveillance. He'd make jokes about her male colleagues that weren't quite jokes, observations about how Daniel stood too close when they talked, how her boss Brad seemed to favorite her. Sarah's friend Lisa tried to intervene. Over coffee one Saturday while Michael was supposedly playing golf, Lisa pointed out how Sarah had stopped wearing certain outfits, stopped going to after-work happy hours, stopped mentioning male names in stories. Sarah got defensive, said Lisa didn't understand what a committed relationship looked like, that compromise was normal. Lisa backed off but kept watching, worried about her friend who seemed to be slowly disappearing. The shoving incidents became more frequent, always when they were alone, always followed by elaborate apologies and promises to change. Michael would blame stress at work, his difficult childhood, anything but his own choices. He'd shower Sarah with affection afterward, expensive gifts she didn't want, romantic gestures that felt more like performances than genuine emotion. He started therapy, but quit after 3 sessions, saying the therapist was biased against men, didn't understand their relationship. Sarah began walking on eggshells, editing her behavior to avoid triggering Michael's anger. She'd text him constantly when out, providing photographic evidence of where she was. She stopped having lunch with colleagues, eating at her desk instead. She wore her hair how he liked it, dressed in clothes he approved of, became a muted version of herself. Her work suffered, her creativity stifled by constant anxiety about what might set him off. The night Michael pushed her off the balcony, they'd been arguing about a business trip Sarah needed to take, a conference in Denver that was crucial for her career advancement. Michael had been drinking, something he'd been doing more frequently, and accused her of planning to meet someone there. Sarah had stood her ground for once, said she was going regardless of his paranoia. That's when he exploded, grabbing her shoulders, shaking her, backing her up against the balcony door. Sarah lived in a garden apartment, thankfully only 1 story up, but the fall onto the concrete patio below left her with 2 cracked ribs and a dislocated shoulder. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the fear as she lay there, unable to move, watching Michael peer over the railing. For a moment, she thought he might come finish what he'd started. Instead, he ran down, suddenly sober, calling 911, crafting a story about her tripping over a loose board. At the hospital, Sarah stuck to Michael's story. The young nurse who treated her had kind eyes but knowing looks, leaving pamphlets about domestic violence resources in Sarah's discharge paperwork. The orthopedic resident who reset her shoulder spoke quietly about how certain types of injuries created specific patterns, how important it was to be honest about what happened. But Sarah just nodded, repeated the lie about tripping, wanted to go home and figure out what to do. Michael never left her side at the hospital, the perfect concerned boyfriend. He held her hand during x-rays, helped her manage the pain medication schedule, told anyone who'd listen how clumsy his girlfriend was, how he'd been warning her about that loose board for weeks. His performance was flawless, but Sarah could see the warning in his eyes whenever medical staff questioned her too closely. She knew that whatever happened next would be worse if she told the truth now. The person who finally saw through the facade was Sarah's stepmother, Patricia. She'd married Sarah's father 5 years after the divorce, when Sarah was already in college, so they'd never been particularly close. Patricia was a tax attorney, practical and reserved, not someone Sarah would typically confide in. But she showed up at Sarah's apartment the day after the hospital discharge with groceries and an unexpected proposal. Patricia announced she was starting a YouTube channel about home organization and life skills, wanting to connect with other women her age who were navigating empty nest syndrome. She needed a co-host, someone younger who could bring a different perspective. Sarah thought the pain medication was making her hallucinate. Patricia, who still printed out emails and called Netflix the Netflix, wanted to start a YouTube channel, but Patricia was insistent, said it would be good for Sarah to have a project during her recovery. The timing was suspicious, but Sarah was too tired and hurt to argue. Patricia set up cameras throughout the apartment, claiming she wanted to capture authentic moments of organization and daily life. She scheduled filming sessions at odd hours, always seeming to arrive just as Michael was getting agitated about something. She'd fumble with equipment, asking Michael to help with technical issues he'd roll his eyes at, clearly finding the whole endeavor beneath him. Michael mocked the project relentlessly, called Patricia pathetic, desperate for attention, going through some midlife crisis. He'd make snide comments during filming, ruining takes on purpose, then apologize insincerely. But he didn't see Patricia as a threat, just an annoying older woman playing at being relevant. He had no idea that Patricia's phone was always recording, that her laptop was constantly backing up footage to cloud storage, that every camera angle was carefully chosen to capture the living room and kitchen where most of their arguments happened. 3 weeks into the channel, which had somehow gained a modest following of women interested in organization tips, Michael completely lost control. The trigger was absurdly small, a comment on their latest video from someone complimenting Sarah's hands as she organized a spice drawer. Michael saw it over Sarah's shoulder, and something in him snapped. He grabbed a kitchen knife, waving it as he screamed about unfaithful women, about how he'd make sure no one ever looked at her again. Sarah tried to run, but her ribs were still healing, movement still painful. Michael cornered her against the refrigerator, the knife inches from her face, his eyes wild with rage. That's when Patricia walked in, supposedly having forgotten her purse, but her phone already live streaming. She moved with surprising speed for a woman in her 60s, putting herself between Sarah and Michael, speaking calmly but firmly, her phone capturing everything. The footage was crystal clear. Michael threatening Sarah, Patricia's calm intervention, Michael trying to grab the phone, Patricia dodging and keeping the camera focused on his face as he screamed threats. When he realized he was being broadcast live, Michael tried to play it off as a joke, but the damage was done. Patricia had sent the link to her lawyer and the police before even entering the apartment. Within minutes, sirens filled the air. What followed was a legal battle that tested Sarah's resolve. Michael hired an expensive lawyer who argued the recordings were obtained without consent, that Sarah and Patricia had conspired to frame him. The prosecutor, a young woman named Jennifer who'd handled dozens of domestic violence cases, fought hard, but the judge ruled the live stream inadmissible, saying it violated Michael's reasonable expectation of privacy in Sarah's home. Without the video evidence, it became he said, she said. Michael's lawyer painted Sarah as vindictive, jealous, mentally unstable from pain medication. They brought up her parents' divorce, suggested she had trust issues that made her create drama. They even got a restraining order against Sarah, claiming she was harassing Michael by recording him. The injustice of it burned, but there was nothing Sarah could do. Sarah thought it was over when she left the courthouse. She'd lost, but at least she could move on, find a new apartment, start fresh. Then she got home to find Michael's belongings being moved into the apartment next door. He'd somehow convinced the elderly landlord, presenting himself as a victim needing a fresh start, paying 6 months' rent up front. The lease was signed, completely legal. Sarah stood in the hallway, watching movers bring in his furniture, feeling trapped all over again. The psychological warfare started immediately. Mail disappeared from Sarah's box. Packages vanished. Strange noises came through the walls at all hours. Michael would stand in the hallway when Sarah left for work, just watching, never saying anything that could violate the restraining order he'd gotten against her. He'd time his exits to match hers, following at just enough distance to be legal, but close enough to be threatening. Patricia didn't give up. She installed security cameras in Sarah's apartment, this time being careful about consent laws. She started staying over more often, working on her YouTube channel, but really standing guard. The channel had grown significantly after some viewers noticed the tension in earlier videos and started asking if Sarah was okay. Patricia carefully acknowledged concerns without revealing details, focusing on creating content about recognizing manipulation tactics and setting boundaries. Things escalated when Michael started dating Sarah's co-worker, Jessica. Jessica was new to the company, fresh out of graduate school, eager to find mentors. Michael presented himself as successful, stable, someone who'd been hurt by a crazy ex. He brought Jessica to building events where he'd portray Sarah as unstable if she showed any reaction to seeing them together. Jessica, young and trusting, believed his version completely. Sarah tried to warn Jessica once, pulling her aside at work to gently suggest being careful. Jessica reported it to HR as harassment, saying Sarah was jealous and trying to sabotage her relationship. Sarah received a formal warning, was told any further contact with Jessica about non-work matters would result in termination. Michael had effectively isolated Sarah at her own workplace, turning colleagues against her with Jessica's unknowing help. Patricia noticed patterns in the harassment. The mail theft always happened when Michael was supposedly visiting his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. The noise disturbances coincided with his girlfriend visits, providing him an alibi. She started documenting everything meticulously, creating spreadsheets of incidents, looking for legally admissible evidence. She also began cultivating a relationship with Mrs. Rodriguez, bringing her cookies and chatting about grandchildren. Through gentle conversation, Patricia learned that Michael often asked to use Mrs. Rodriguez's landline, claiming his cell service was unreliable. Mrs. Rodriguez, lonely and grateful for attention, always agreed. Patricia carefully explained the situation, showing Mrs. Rodriguez evidence of Michael's true nature. The elderly woman was horrified to learn she'd been used, immediately agreeing to let Patricia monitor the phone with her consent. The breakthrough came when they caught Michael using Mrs. Rodriguez's phone to leave threatening voicemails on Sarah's work line. His voice was clearly identifiable, making graphic threats about what would happen if she didn't quit her job and move away. He also called HR anonymously, making false complaints about Sarah's performance and suggesting she might be stealing from the company. With Mrs. Rodriguez's permission as the phone's owner, these recordings were completely legal evidence. But Michael's biggest mistake was targeting Jessica once she started seeing through his lies. She noticed inconsistencies in his stories about Sarah, times when he claimed to be one place but seemed to know about events elsewhere. When she tried to pull back from the relationship, Michael turned on her with shocking speed. He accessed her work computer during lunch dates, sending emails from her account that made her look incompetent. Money went missing from department funds, all traced to Jessica's login. Jessica was fired on a Thursday afternoon, escorted out in tears while Michael played the supportive boyfriend. But she was smarter than he'd anticipated. Before leaving, she'd forwarded IT evidence of unauthorized access from her computer, timestamps showing logins when she was provably elsewhere. She came straight to Sarah's apartment, finally ready to hear the truth. The two women sat at Sarah's kitchen table comparing notes, realizing the full extent of Michael's manipulation. Together, they went to the police with everything: the phone recordings, the computer evidence, Patricia's detailed documentation. Detective Maria Santos, who specialized in cyber stalking cases, took them seriously. She'd seen this pattern before, men who use technology and psychological manipulation rather than physical violence to control women. She promised a thorough investigation, warning them to be extremely careful in the meantime. The investigation revealed Michael had done this before. 2 other women in different cities had restraining orders against him, both with eerily similar stories. Detective Santos arranged a video call between all 3 victims. Emma from Seattle, who'd dated him 5 years ago, had lost 2 jobs due to his harassment. Rachel from Portland had been forced to change her name and move across the country to escape him. All 3 women had been told they were crazy, jealous, unstable. All 3 had been failed by systems that didn't take their fears seriously until it was almost too late. Michael was arrested at his job, led out in handcuffs in front of everyone who'd believed his lies about Sarah. The evidence was overwhelming: breaking and entering, cyberstalking, identity theft, wire fraud. His lawyer tried to negotiate, but the prosecutor, Jennifer from the first trial, wasn't having it. She'd learned from her earlier loss and built an airtight case. The judge, a different one this time, saw through Michael's attempts to play victim. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release. The judge also issued lifetime restraining orders for all 3 women and mandated that Michael register as a stalker upon release. Sarah sat in the courtroom with Emma and Rachel, all 3 holding hands as the sentence was read. It wasn't just justice for Sarah, but for all of them, for every woman he'd terrorized while others looked away. Sarah's company not only reinstated her, but promoted her to senior management with a formal apology. Jessica got her job back with back pay and became one of Sarah's closest friends. They worked together to implement new security protocols and training about recognizing manipulation in workplace relationships. Their presentations to other companies helped countless women identify red flags they might have otherwise missed. Patricia's YouTube channel exploded after she posted a series about recognizing coercive control without ever naming Michael directly. She used her platform to educate women about subtle forms of abuse, about trusting their instincts, about the importance of documentation. The channel funded a non-profit providing security systems to domestic violence survivors. Patricia insisted Sarah be on the board, saying her insight was invaluable. Sarah found a new apartment in a different neighborhood, a charming Victorian conversion with good security and friendly neighbors. Patricia helped her move, and they spent the weekend setting up security cameras together, but this time just for peace of mind rather than active fear. The apartment had morning light that streamed through tall windows, a small garden where Sarah could grow herbs, neighbors who minded their own business but smiled in the hallway. Therapy helped Sarah process not just the trauma, but the shame of not leaving sooner, of not seeing the signs everyone said were so obvious in hindsight. Dr. Jennifer Chen, her therapist, specialized in trauma from intimate partner violence. She helped Sarah understand that Michael had been an expert manipulator, that his tactics were designed specifically to make victims doubt themselves. They worked on rebuilding Sarah's confidence, her ability to trust her own judgment. A year later, Sarah met David at a book club focused on mystery novels. He was a pediatric nurse who baked incredible sourdough and had a rescue dog named Clementine. Their relationship progressed slowly. David always respectful of Sarah's boundaries, never pushing when she needed space. He listened when she finally told him about Michael, asked how he could help her feel safe, never treated her like she was broken or damaged. David understood that Sarah sometimes needed to check locks twice, that sudden movements could startle her, that certain words or situations might trigger anxiety. He never made her feel crazy for her trauma responses. Instead, they worked together to create new, positive associations. When Sarah flinched at raised voices, David would speak more softly. When she got anxious about his female colleagues, he'd patiently reassure her without making her feel ridiculous for worrying. Emma and Rachel became unexpected sources of support and friendship. They had a group chat where they shared wins and setbacks, celebrating Emma's promotion, supporting Rachel through her wedding planning, cheering Sarah on as she slowly learned to trust again. They understood each other in ways no one else could, the specific type of hypervigilance that came from surviving someone like Michael. They called themselves survivors, not victims, and reminded each other of their strength. Sarah eventually spoke at one of Patricia's events, sharing her story with a room full of women. Her hands shook as she described the first shove, the escalation, the night on the balcony. But her voice grew stronger as she talked about Patricia's intervention, about finding her power again, about learning to recognize manipulation tactics. The audience was silent, many crying, seeing their own experiences reflected in Sarah's story. After the talk, women approached Sarah for hours, sharing their own stories, asking for advice. One young woman, barely out of college, said Sarah's story made her realize her boyfriend's behavior wasn't normal. Another, a grandmother, whispered that she wished someone had told her these things 50 years ago. Sarah hugged them all, gave them her email, promised to help however she could. Patricia watched from the side, proud of the woman Sarah had become. Sarah's relationship with her father improved through all of this. He'd been distant since the divorce, unsure how to connect with his adult daughter. But seeing Patricia fight for Sarah, seeing the danger his daughter had been in, shook him into action. He started attending therapy himself, working on being more emotionally available. Their monthly dinners became weekly, then included David, creating the family Sarah had always wanted but never thought possible. 5 years after that night on the balcony, Sarah stood in her garden apartment preparing dinner with David. Patricia was coming over with her new husband, Robert, a retired firefighter she'd met at a charity event. Emma was in town for a conference and would join them, bringing her new girlfriend. Rachel would join by video call from Portland, where she was 8 months pregnant with her first child. Jessica was bringing dessert and her fiancé, a social worker who specialized in helping abuse survivors. As Sarah chopped vegetables for salad, David sang off-key to the radio while making his famous lasagna. Clementine dozed in a patch of sunlight, occasionally opening one eye to check for dropped food. The scene was beautifully ordinary, a gathering of chosen family who understood that survival was its own form of victory. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Patricia saying she was 5 minutes away and bringing wine. Everything was normal, safe, good. The scars, both physical and emotional, had faded but never fully disappeared. Sarah's ribs still ached sometimes when the weather changed. She still preferred to sit where she could see exits, still felt her heart race when someone raised their voice unexpectedly. But these remnants of trauma no longer controlled her life. They were simply part of her story, evidence of what she'd survived and overcome. She'd learned to honor them without letting them limit her. Sarah had learned that healing wasn't linear, that some days were harder than others, that triggers could surprise you years later. But she'd also learned that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined, that asking for help was brave, not weak, that the right people would support her without judgment. She'd learned to trust her instincts again, to set boundaries without apology, to recognize red flags before they became dangers. Most importantly, Sarah had learned that love shouldn't hurt, that jealousy wasn't romantic, that control wasn't care. Real love, like what she'd found with David, was patient and kind and secure. It was someone who celebrated her successes without feeling threatened, who encouraged her friendships, who never made her feel like she needed to shrink herself to be loved. It was freedom, not captivity, safety, not fear. When dinner was ready and everyone had gathered around the table, Patricia raised her glass for a toast. She didn't mention the past, didn't need to. Everyone at that table understood the journey, the fight, the victory of simply being there together. Instead, she toasted to the future, to continued healing, to helping others find their way to safety. As their glasses clinked, Sarah felt the warmth of genuine connection, of people who'd seen her at her lowest and loved her through it. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and David was washing dishes, Sarah stepped out onto her small balcony. It was nothing like the one from her old apartment, just a tiny space with room for 2 chairs and some potted plants. But she could stand there, without fear, could enjoy the evening air without remembering the fall. The city lights twinkled below, full of stories she'd never know, women fighting battles similar to hers. Sarah thought about Michael sometimes, wondered if he was getting help in prison or just planning his next manipulation. She knew he'd be released eventually, would have to register his whereabouts, stay away from all of them. Part of her would always be watchful, aware that men like him rarely changed. But she refused to live in fear of someday. She'd built a life full of love and purpose, surrounded by people who truly cared for her. That was her victory. The YouTube channel had grown beyond anything Patricia had imagined. They had millions of subscribers, had helped countless women recognize abuse, escape dangerous situations, rebuild their lives. Sarah occasionally appeared in videos now, comfortable being public about her experience. She'd received hundreds of emails from women who said her story had saved their lives, had given them courage to leave, to seek help, to believe they deserved better. Sarah kept every one of those emails in a special folder. On bad days, when the trauma tried to convince her she was weak or broken, she'd read them. Each message was a reminder that her pain had purpose, that surviving Michael had allowed her to help others survive their own monsters. It didn't make what happened okay. Nothing could, but it gave meaning to the suffering, transformed it into something powerful. David understood this need to help others, supported Sarah's advocacy work even when it meant late nights answering crisis emails or weekends spent at survivor events. He'd come to understand that this work wasn't just about helping others, it was part of Sarah's own healing journey. Every woman she helped leave an abusive situation helped Sarah reclaim a piece of herself that Michael had tried to steal. Every story shared lightened the burden of her own. As Sarah went back inside, David handed her a cup of tea, chamomile with honey, exactly how she liked it. Such a small thing, someone knowing your preferences and caring enough to remember. But after years of walking on eggshells, of changing herself to avoid conflict, as the small bowl and sauce anse, an act sub and armor is noko fagwardi kenso and kin, and Bartonstad iteration felt revolutionary. She could be herself completely, quirks and trauma and all, and still be loved. That knowledge was worth everything she'd been through to find it. The next morning, Sarah woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and Clementine's gentle snoring. David was already up, making coffee and humming in the kitchen. An ordinary Sunday stretched before them, plans for farmers' market wandering and afternoon reading. No drama, no fear, no watching over her shoulder. Just life in all its beautiful, mundane glory. Sarah smiled, stretched, and joined David in the kitchen. He handed her coffee without being asked, kissed her forehead, asked what she wanted for breakfast. Such simple things, but Sarah knew their value now, knew how precious safety was, how extraordinary ordinary could be. She'd fought hard for this life, this peace, this love that lifted rather than diminished. And she'd keep fighting, not just for herself, but for every woman still trapped where she'd once been. Because everyone deserved to wake up unafraid, to love without fear, to know that the person beside them was a partner, not a prison. As she sipped her coffee and listened to David's terrible jokes, Sarah felt profound gratitude. Not for what had happened, she'd never be grateful for abuse, but for surviving it, for finding Patricia and her unconventional rescue plan, for Emma and Rachel's understanding, for Jessica's eventual friendship, for therapy that helped her heal, for David's patient love, for the life she'd built from the ashes of what Michael had tried to burn down. The girl who'd laughed off that first slap, who'd made excuses and ignored red flags, seemed like a stranger now. Sarah wanted to reach back through time and hug her, tell her she deserved better, that love shouldn't hurt, but she couldn't change the past. All she could do was use her story to help others recognize the signs sooner, leave faster, believe they deserved safety and respect. If her pain could prevent even one woman from experiencing what she had, it would be worth sharing. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, the old fear spiked, but then she read the message. A woman from last week's event, thanking Sarah for giving her courage to leave her controlling boyfriend. She'd packed her things that night, was staying with her sister, had already contacted a lawyer. Sarah smiled, typing back encouragement and resources. Another soul finding freedom, another victory against men who thought they could control through fear. This was Sarah's life now: morning coffee and rescue stories, ordinary love and extraordinary survival, peaceful Sundays and powerful advocacy. She'd been broken but refused to stay that way. She'd been silenced but found her voice. She'd been controlled but reclaimed her power. And she'd spend the rest of her life making sure other women could do the same, because everyone deserved what she'd found on the other side of fear: a life worth living, a love worth having, a future worth fighting for. The balcony that had once been a crime scene was now just architecture. The bruises had faded to memory. The fear had transformed into fuel for change. Sarah was no longer a victim or even just a survivor. She was a warrior, a teacher, a beacon of hope for women still trapped in the dark. And that transformation, that journey from broken to beautiful, that was the greatest victory of all. She'd won not by destroying Michael, but by refusing to let him destroy her, by choosing love over fear, hope over despair, life over mere existence. As Sunday unfolded with its gentle rhythm, Sarah knew there would still be hard days. Trauma didn't vanish just because you'd found happiness, but she also knew she had tools now, support systems, genuine love. She had a life worth protecting, relationships worth nurturing, purpose worth pursuing. Michael had tried to take everything from her. Instead, his cruelty had revealed her strength. His isolation had built her community. His hatred had taught her about real love. And somewhere out there, another woman was recognizing the warning signs, making an escape plan, choosing her safety over his comfort. Sarah's story, Patricia's videos, their collective refusal to be silenced, rippled outward in waves of change. Each woman who left an abusive situation created possibility for others. Each story shared lifted the veil of shame and silence that allowed abuse to flourish. Each victory, no matter how small, pushed back against a culture that too often looked away. This was Sarah's legacy, not as a victim, but as a victor, not defined by what was done to her, but by what she did next. She'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and transformed it into purpose. She'd faced down a monster and emerged not just intact, but improved. Not just surviving, but thriving. And every morning when she woke up safe in her own bed, every laugh shared with friends who truly knew her, every moment of genuine love with David, was a testament to the power of refusing to be broken. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the little garden where Sarah grew herbs and hope in equal measure. Clementine padded out to investigate interesting smells. David called from the kitchen asking if she wanted blueberries in her pancakes. Life continued in all its ordinary splendor. And Sarah, once pushed off a balcony by someone who claimed to love her, now stood firmly on solid ground, surrounded by people who actually did. She'd found her way home, not to a place, but to a life worth living. And that journey from fear to freedom, that was a story worth telling, a victory worth celebrating, a future worth embracing with open arms and an unguarded heart.